today we're diving into one of the biggest and often overlooked parts of retirement.
People are no longer solely focused on maximizing income. What they're looking for are,
How do you think about just purpose beyond the paycheck?
for so many people, their identity and purpose is wrapped up in their work. And when they leave their work, what do? It's scary. Change is scary. One thing that I do think is critically important is to...
Everyone, welcome back to Your Retirement Plan Simplified. I'm your host, Joe Curry. If you're getting close to retirement or already in it, you've likely thought about what comes next, not just financially, but personally. So today we're diving into one of the biggest and often overlooked parts of retirement, purpose. What gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning? Where do you find meaning once the career chapter is behind you? Joining me today is Nancy Collamer. Nancy is a nationally recognized retirement coach, the author of Second Act Careers, and a blogger. She spent years helping people design purpose-filled lives after leaving the workforce. So Nancy, before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a retirement coach?
Sure. Great to be here. So my story is that I started out in corporate HR. And then at the point that my first daughter was born, I decided to stay home for a little bit, went back to school, got a master's degree in career development. And at the time, the thing that fascinated me the most was the whole issue of how moms could work on a flexible basis. So for the first half of my coaching career, that's really what I focused on. I wrote about these issues and I coached moms around the country and actually around the world as to how you can work in a way that was interesting and meaningful, but still have time for your life. And then in 2008, when the last big financial crisis happened, I started talking with a lot of people who were my age at the time, and that was back when I was in my 50s. And what I realized was there were a lot of people who were saying, wow, my retirement savings have really gone down. I think that I might need to do some sort of work in retirement. I don't want to keep working on a full-time basis. What's out there? And for me, that was when the light bulb went on and I came up with the idea for the book, Second Act Careers. And that's when I really shifted my focus. So it's been an interesting journey.
Okay, very cool. So now that we're up to speed with why we should be talking to you about this kind of stuff, can we start by, thinking about the big picture? When we talk about second act careers, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, it's such a good question because second acts really can mean a lot of different things to different people because, let's face it, Joe, when somebody is 30 and has been a journalist and decides that they're tired of working in a relatively low-paying, difficult field, and then they decide to become a landscape gardener, that's a second act, right? But for purposes of my book and what we'll be talking about today, the way that I define second acts in retirement is that the shift really happens because people are no longer solely focused on maximizing income, and instead what they're looking for are different types of work. Oftentimes it's part-time or sort of gig type work that they can do on a flexible basis that's going to be interesting and fun and meaningful for them.
Okay. And I know that for some people, the idea of working in retirement feels a little counterintuitive. So second acts, I'm sure they don't necessarily have to be about staying in the workforce. What are other ways you see people define this concept for themselves?
Yeah. So obviously in my book, I talk about 50 different ways. It's subtitled 50 different ways to profit from your passions in semi-retirement. So, the most obvious things that people do and the things people are most familiar with is what I call sort of the knowledge-related fields. People become consultants or coaches, or they write or speak or teach about a topic that they've spent 20, 30 years being involved in. And so that's a very common transition for people to make. But these days, people are doing all sorts of things. I have a whole chapter in the book about getting paid to travel. There's a chapter about how you can monetize your informational products on the web. I talk about there's a lot going on in the longevity space, which I happen to think is a great field for older people to get involved in. So there's lots of different ways that you can use your skills. A lot of it depends on, what are your interests, what are your goals, and what are the opportunities that would be a good fit for your lifestyle needs.
Yeah, so many opportunities, really, right? Probably more than we could even name today. And now for listeners who might not want to work at all in retirement, they're not even worried about income maybe, how do you think about just purpose beyond the paycheck?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And I think that for so many people, their identity and their sense of purpose is really wrapped up in their work. And when they leave their work, there is suddenly this void that they struggle to fill. And so it's really important for people to spend time thinking about what is it that motivates you. Two of my favorite questions to think about. One is what energizes you? And along with that, who energizes you? What type of environments do you find really exciting? And along with that question, you should also think about what drains you, who drains you, what type of environments drain you. So that's one sort of set of questions I think is really interesting for people to discuss. The other question that I think is really helpful to consider is what are you curious about? I have, as I mentioned before, I have a master's degree in career development. And so I tend to use the word passion as much as anybody does. It's very clickable in headlines and columns that I write. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people don't have one overriding passion. So one of the things, and I have a blog post about this on Next Avenue, and it's a very popular post. One of the things I advise people to do is don't think of passion as being one thing. Instead, think of it as being a formula or an acronym where P stands for people. Who are the people that you want to serve? Who are the people you enjoy being around? A is for activities. What are the types of things that you most enjoy doing? The two S's stand for skills, strengths, and sensibilities. What are you good at? What are the things that you really enjoy doing and do well? The I is for interests. And then, because it can't just be about who you are internally, the O, the N, and the S stand for what are the opportunities and needs in the marketplace. And again, those can be work opportunities, but it can also be volunteer opportunities. It can also be what are the types of classes that might be of interest to you or the groups that you might find compelling to join. So don't feel that you're less than if you don't have one overriding passion. My experience has been very few people have one passion, but they do have a lot of interests and skills that can be leveraged in new and exciting ways.
Okay. And it's really, I find it interesting how many people, until they're retired, don't realize how much of their identity is tied up in their career or their work or their business, whatever it is. And another thing that we see is, this is in the first year, typically everyone has lots to do. There's, those trips we wanted to take and people we wanted to see and catch up with. But then often what we see is there's this sense of, okay, now what? And the calendar is wide open, but it can feel a little disorienting. And I'd love your take on why, if people haven't already thought about this stuff, it is so important to be thinking about purpose during this phase.
Yeah. And I think you bring up such a great point, which is that there is this initial honeymoon phase, right? It's great. People have been working for 30 plus years. You finally don't have to, get up when the alarm rings. It's wonderful initially. But as you said, it is very common for people to hit a point where suddenly the calendar is empty. And then what do you do? And, the fact is, Joe, with any type of life transition, the first step is always that you need to spend some time on self-reflection, self-analysis, and really think about three key questions. What is it that you love to do? What is it that you do well? And what do you find most meaningful? And I'm sure people have seen, those Venn diagrams on the internet. It's the intersection of those three things where you really find the sweet spot of what you can do next. And then you take that and then you begin to research what's out there. What are the possibilities? And I think that's what's really interesting is a lot of people don't realize all of the exciting things that are out there for people to do. I mean, I have a newsletter that I send out to readers of my blog. And in the newsletter, actually, that went out this morning, I was talking about the fact that community colleges, for instance, have programs specifically designed for people over 50. Lifelong learning programs. There's all sorts of classes out there that are really interesting, whether you want to use them to improve your skills or whether you just want to use them because they're interesting. And that's just one example, but there's so many different types of interesting things that you can do. And the more you read and the more you listen to podcasts like this and other ones that are out there, the more you begin to realize, wow, there's really a lot of interesting things to do in retirement that I just didn't pay attention to before.
For sure. No, that's great. And at the end, I'll ask you about maybe some of these resources, and we'll get some also into the show notes. So anyone listening, even Nancy's website, we'll make sure we have that in the show notes so that people can dig a little deeper on this stuff. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges. So and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are people most often struggling with as they step into this new chapter? Is it the fear of change, or is it more of a lack of direction, or is there a fear of getting older? What do you see coming out?
Yes, yes, and yes. Uh, it is all of those things. And I have to tell you that when I wrote my book and I interviewed 25 people who had switched to second acts, and at the end of the interviews, I sat back and I played back the tapes and listened to what they had told me. And I was really amazed by how often the word fear came up. It's scary. Change is scary. Going through this type of transition is often very challenging for people. And so that's something I would emphasize to people is that if you're feeling a little bit nervous about this, you are in very, very good company. It is something a lot of people deal with. But yes, there is this sense of loss of identity, of loss of routine and structure to your day, and a lack of meaning and purpose. And also people begin to start to feel a little bit irrelevant, like they just don't matter. So, the people who seem to really be happy during retirement are people who spend some time thinking about, okay, what is going to give my life some meaning? And I don't know who to credit. I've heard several different authors talk about this, but I love the concept of having a big P and a little p with purpose. The big P with purpose are things like, I want to help with solving world hunger and, combating the climate crisis. But the little p is things like, I just want to help out in my neighborhood. I want to be the person who helps bring dinner to somebody who's just had some surgery. Or I want to be the person who helps out with my grandkids to make life easier for my own children. And the little p, if you can take so many people feel like the way to give back is I've got to do something really big, and it becomes overwhelming. And the end result is they do nothing. Instead of saying, what's something small that I can do today to feel like I've made a difference? And just that mental shift can really help people feel better about themselves and their role in the world.
Sure, yeah, and you beat me to my next line of questioning here. I was going to ask you maybe first if you could give an example of things that you've seen where someone's kind of jumped into something and has turned into something very impactful, but also like an example, and you kind of just gave it, but I'm thinking of things like caregiving or other kind of smaller things, maybe even just helping out with grandkids, things like that, where there's still that, I guess you mentioned it's kind of a small P, different activities or different things that people are doing and really still finding meaning in retirement.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of a couple that I spoke with who they're both attorneys. One of them had their own law firm. One of them had been a corporate attorney, and they enjoyed the legal profession. They had never worked together, but they both enjoyed being attorneys, but they were looking for something new. And one of the things they wanted to do in retirement was to travel. And so one night they were sort of sharing a glass of wine and talking about the legal profession. And they started talking about some of the attorneys who they had met in this country who had come from other countries. And the fact that their English was quite good, but when it came to legal terminology, sometimes the English legal terms were a bit of a stumbling block for them. So they came up with this idea that they put together a workshop of legal terms in English for people that were non-native speakers. And they got invited to several different countries to come for a week and do workshops. So it was a great, they felt like they were giving back, that they were doing something that was really helpful to people. Again, it's not solving world hunger, but they're filling a gap, and they got to travel. And so it was a really fun solution for them.
Yeah, what I also love about that is it was something, I'm sure they were both very busy in their careers while they were working, and they found something that they could kind of come together on, right? I feel like, we see when I have young kids right now, so my wife's going one way, I'm going the other for sports and this and that, and we got our own activities. And so being able to find things that you can do together, especially when you have all that extra time in that second
Definitely.
act, is would definitely be fulfilling, I'm sure. Okay. All right. So let's try to make this practical. So if someone's listening today, they feel stuck. Maybe they want more from retirement and they're not sure what that looks like. What's a good first step for them to take?
Yeah. So, a couple of things I would suggest, and again, I want to emphasize to take a little bit pressure off of yourself. You are not alone in feeling this way. And as I mentioned before, the first step is to spend some time on self-reflection. So, let me share a very simple exercise that people can do. Take out 3 sheets of paper. On the top of one of them, write down what I love to do. Another sheet of paper, what I do well. And on the third sheet, write down, what do I find most meaningful in my life right now? And then set a timer for 30 minutes for each sheet of paper and write down everything you can think of. And so so if you're working on the sheet about what do I do well, I want you to think about the things that you do well in your work life, in your volunteer life, in your personal life. And they can be the big things, but they can also be the really simple things. I'm the person who's great at organizing dinner parties. I'm the person who, I have strong writing skills, whatever it is. And do the same type of thing with what you love to do and what you find most meaningful. And then just put the sheets away for a day and then come back to them and look, what's the commonalities between these 3 things? What does this say about what I should be doing next? So it's a simple exercise. It can be very helpful to take the results of this exercise and talk it over with your partner. They might see some things that you didn't even think to put down. Oftentimes, the things that come to us that are so easy, they're just things we do naturally. We don't see those things in ourselves, but other people do, and they really appreciate them. So that's a simple exercise. Again, going back to my website, I have on the site 100 plus great resources for your second act. And so the next step in the process, though, is once you begin to think about, who am I and what's most important to me, is then to take a look at what are some possibilities, what's out there, what are some outlets for my interests and skills and talents. And as I said before, that is new territory for a lot of people. So if you take a look at that list, you'll find a lot of sites. I think a really helpful thing that you can do is go to a site like nextavenue.org, which is one of the sites that I write for, and read some of the profiles on there of other people who are over 50 who've gone back to the workplace, or people that are having interesting volunteer experiences or travel experiences. I think by reading those profiles or listening to podcasts where those types of people are interviewed, it gives people tremendous inspiration and ideas, even if their path is very different from your own.
Yeah, no, I love all of that. I think maybe a couple other things just listen to you. I know a lot of people have a hard time identifying things they do well. So you had mentioned talking it out with your partner. So yeah, I think whether it's best friends, partner, maybe your kids, like just asking them maybe to contribute a little bit to that page might be helpful for some people. And a lot of things I think that maybe we do well, we don't give ourselves enough credit for because they just seem easy to us, right? Because they come naturally and we do it well. But yeah, no, I love that. Another thing we've talked about in the past is if you're really having trouble finding that passion, that purpose, or whatever it is just creating, like, just one of your priorities is just trying new things and exploring this whole topic. So until you get something that maybe you latch onto and you can run with, it's just, you can get some purpose from just exploring self-reflection and, what are you enjoying, trying new things and just seeing what sticks, right?
Yeah. And Joe, I think another thing that it has proven very helpful for people is I sometimes recommend that you look at that first year out as a gap year. Just like
Yeah.
kids graduating from college take time to just explore things without the pressure of, oh my goodness, I need to find the job tomorrow. Give yourself permission to take that first year and explore different interests. Take a workshop, take a class, maybe take a trip somewhere. Try out a couple of different volunteer assignments. When it comes to volunteering, people often find it more challenging than they expect to find a meaningful volunteer assignment. So it can take a little bit of time. But if you say to yourself, this year is my gap year, it takes the pressure off of you.
Sure.
You don't feel like you have to have it all solved and wrapped up with a nice, neat little bow. It really helps to take that time to consider the options.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love that. And now you're just giving us a whole bunch of pieces of advice here, but I'm going to ask my last question anyway around what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's just beginning to think about life beyond work and again, maybe feeling a little bit uncertain about that next
Yeah.
stage?
So, the one thing that I haven't really emphasized, but I do think is critically important is to partner up for success. Joe, when you think back to other transitions, major life transitions, when you got married, when you graduated college, you always had a team of people around you. You had friends who were going through the same thing at the same time, who you could discuss things with. Your parents were there for you. So, whether it's somebody who you take walks with, whether you join a group, whether you find a coach, if you want to take a class and you'll meet other people who have similar interests as you do in a class, I think we are social animals. We do much better when we are around other people who can give us ideas, who can motivate us, and who might partner with us in taking those next steps. So find someone or a group of people who can be your community of cheerleaders and supporters during this time period.
Yeah, it's so important for sure. All right, Nancy, where can listeners go to learn more about your work, your book, explore coaching options or anything else, or just any other resources that you think are important?
Sure. Well, my website is just nancycollamer.com. And also I have many articles on nextavenue.org, which is
Okay,
PBS's site for people over 50. And people can find me over there as well.
awesome. So again, to all our listeners, we'll get that in the show notes. So retirementplanningsimplified.ca/blog. And you'll be able to find Nancy's name there. And yeah, if you just click find the show notes, we'll have all the resources listed. So Nancy, thanks again for sharing your time and your wisdom today. This is a fun conversation because, again, we talk about the uncertainty and excitement that can come with retirement. But I think for a lot of people, it's a good reminder that retirement's not the beginning to the end. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Thanks
so
for
Nancy,
having me,
thanks
Joe.
again. Yeah, thanks again for joining. Take care.